So it's November 8th, 2019, and this is episode 3 of Film Cold Podcast. So, as you know, I got a new microphone, or it was lent to me rather, and I noticed that the recording in the previous video was kind of low, and you kind of could hear my mouth way too much, if that makes any sense to audio people. I'm sure it does, like my lip smacking and so on and so forth. So, I have it properly set up this time. My friend Josh set it up for me, so thanks again, Josh. Um, Hopefully this sounds better, and I'm slowly working out the kinks. So, um, maybe we'll get some viewers. That would be cool. But I'm trying something new here by um, my previous reviews. I haven't been watching the movie that day. It's usually something I've watched early in the week, or several days before. So I just finished watching this movie, so I'm gonna do the review right after watching it. That way I have what I want to say more fresh in my mind, and hopefully it'll be a better discussion review experience. So I'm starting out with 2009's Watchmen, directed by the one and only Zack Snyder. So, which is described on the back of this DVD as a powerful experience. Okay. No, I enjoyed this movie. I feel like for Zack Snyder is someone that I didn't know more about their career until like more recently. As you know, he does a lot of DC movies. Did Man of Steel. I believe he did Suicide Squad. 300 is one of his earlier movies, and I feel like you can see a little bit of everything out of his filmography in this movie. And this is quite the epic. I gotta say, I really enjoyed the opening to this movie, the opening scene, and through the intro credits. I think it does a really good job of giving you story through visuals. Obviously, they're showing the opening credits, producers, directors, writers, so on and so forth, all those title credits that you need to put in the beginning. But it's doing it in a way where it's setting up the story, setting up, because this is an alternate 1985 that they're living in, and there's many changes because, for one, there are superheroes running around. So, to see what's changed, and it's 1985, as I mentioned, and Nixon's in his third term, and it was funny to see another Nixon poster with a swastika on it. That was something I just saw, and now I'm mentioning this for the third time. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. That also had a Nixon poster, or campaign poster, and it had a swastika drawn on it on top. So that's some interesting imagery that is reoccurring in movies that I'm seeing. So yeah, take some political statements, and don't know where I was going with that. Anyway, so someone's killing all these superheroes. It's 1985, and they've decided to band together to respond to the murder of one of their own. So they soon uncover this sinister plot that puts all the humanity. I'm reading the back of the DVD cover. I do not know why I have this DVD. I've never seen this movie before in my life. I knew about it. I'm not entirely sure where this came from. I just happen to have it. So here it is. I actually watched a DVD tonight instead of my usual streaming. So all these superheroes fight together to stop impending doom. This ticking clock down to Doomsday, and with Dr. Manhattan, and all these characters that you're introduced to. And I think it does a good job of just putting you in the middle of it. You do get a background of these characters, and you do get an origin of Dr. Manhattan, actually, as the film progresses. But I feel like for the most part you're just kind of already meant to like figured out what these superheroes are. Like I said, through that intro credit kind of explains some stuff, but for the most part it's just kind of like you're in the middle of everything, which is cool. And yeah, that's a good thing about it. It doesn't take time to draw out the origin story of every single hero or whatever, because it's not necessary for the story that they're telling. So, as I continue reading, but if our superheroes are gone, who will save us? Yeah, so there's a lot of themes in here that parallel to Zack Snyder films that I saw later, like Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, all that DC things. Um, he does comic books very well, or telling a graphic novel in a film very well. Like I keep mentioning, that intro scene is just really cool in how it's filmed. This film stylistically is really cool. Um, the action's really well choreographed. Um, you have really cool visuals throughout the whole movie, and that kind of keeps your attention because this is a really long film. This is a 3.5 hour film, and I I don't think it warrants 3.5 hours. It's hard for me to think of any film that would warrant a almost 4 hour running time, um, because there's fat to trim at that point. I think if you're going over 2.5 hours, you should definitely be wrapping it up, and that goes for any movie. It's just not that it's a lot to ask for, um, a runtime of that long, but I just feel like, yeah, there's like I said, there's fat to be trimmed there. Like there's definitely things you can take out that aren't not essential to the story, but like just things that you can tighten up. And that's just my humble opinion. But yeah, at 3.5 hours, I wasn't getting bored by the story by any means. I think it's really cool. Cool plot, cool concept. Definitely is a darker and grittier take on superheroes than any other movie I've seen. You know, a lot of people praise like The Dark Knight and the Christopher Nolan Batman movies for being like a more grittier take on the superhero genre, but Watchmen's really, um, 2009. I'm trying to think of where that is in the Christopher Nolan Batman timeline. If that's, let me think of when Batman Begins was filmed. If that's before or after 2005. Okay, so this is this is actually after The Dark Knight as well, right? I'm looking these up. Dark Knight's 2008. So yeah, um, those films in comparison to this, are kids movies. Honestly, this has a lot of gore, a lot of violence, hints of rape and abuse, and darker themes like that you would not see otherwise, and probably have not seen since. Can't think of a superhero movie that has the kind of intensity in certain parts that this does. And it's kind of cool to see a grittier take. It gives these heroes kind of motivations that otherwise haven't been experienced. So yeah, Watchmen is a good movie. A tad too long. I had to take a break, but I just finished it, as I said, and it's really good. As far as the acting is concerned, I never would have pictured Patrick Wilson as a superhero, but it works. That works really well. And Rorschach being played by his name is escaping me now. Jackie Earl Haley, that's it. He is a very diverse actor, and he's been in many roles where he plays some darker characters, I guess you would say, and this one is no exception. He's really amping it up, and yeah, look at any film that he's been in, and he is usually a villain, or yeah, a bad guy. He's essentially an anti-hero, I guess, for a shark is. But yeah, I have no familiarity with the comic books that this is based on, or the the world that I was watching. But it was a really interesting movie, good concept, and at the end of the day, I would recommend this movie. So Watchmen 2009 gets my recommendation. Definitely worth checking out if you haven't. And yeah, that's standing at 10 years old now. Um, this film holds up, definitely, technically. The special effects are, CGI and everything is really good for the most part. Um, not saying 10 years is a huge gap, but you do kind of tend to see things not stand the test of time. Um, but that is not the case in Watchmen. So yeah, I recommend this film, and that's that. So definitely a stark contrast from the CGI spectacle that is Watchmen. I decided to watch Nosferatu from 1922. So this is a silent film, obviously, from the early 20s, and it's the story of the original vampire. And definitely a movie that you, as a film fanatic, is worth seeing. Um, it was banned for excessive horror back in the day, in its first release in Sweden, and it was finally lifted for that in 1972. But there's a lot of interesting trivia surrounding this movie, and by any means, to watch a movie that is 90, well, it was filmed in 21, so 98 years old, it's interesting to see how far movies have progressed from this era to now. Like I said, just watching a movie from 2009 and how that's filmed and how that's shot, and then something from the very, very early days of cinema, like this film. Um, Even watching it, I watched the version that's on Amazon Prime. I'm also reading here that there are many different versions of this movie, depending on how you find it. So the one I found was on Amazon Prime, and I thought it was funny that some of the title cards are cut off even, and it's very blurry in some scenes. And this is the early days of filmmaking. So to even have remnants of this film and a solid watchable version is kind of amazing. You don't get to see many things that live to 100 or more. Definitely not in this type of way. But it's cool to see the story is based off of obviously Bram Stoker's Count Dracula, um, and they kind of changed the names to kind of avoid copyright at that time, and that did not work. And so a lot of the versions of this film were destroyed, but it later resurfaced, and that's how we get to watch it today. It's cool to see the vampire that you know you learn about and how those tropes are still the same as they are. Count Orlok, as he's called, or Nosferatu, can put people in a trance, and um, he sleeps in a coffin that is embedded with dirt from unhallowed ground, and all these different tropes that we come to know, and it hasn't really changed much from what we know it to be, which is really interesting. Of course, there's countless, no pun intended, Count Dracula movies and interpretations of, I think of Keanu Reeves in that one, Bram Stoker's Dracula, um, Shadow of the Vampire, trying to think of more, but this is definitely highly regarded as one of the most classic movies. I know it's on Roger Ebert's list. I know it's on Schneider's list of 101 movies to watch before you die. And for those unfamiliar, Schneider is a very prolific horror director. I know he has a lot of producer credits in, Pet Cemetery and Insidious and Split and all those modern day horror flicks that we are familiar with. But if you don't like the organ, I wouldn't recommend this. There's a droning organ music playing throughout the whole entire film, obviously because it's silent, and you are reading most of the time because of the title cards for each line of dialogue in the movie. And some people will just never watch this film, and that's understandable. But if you are a true horror fan and like me, someone who enjoys cinema, regardless of what age it is from, then yeah, I definitely recommend this. It's only a 90-minute movie, so the running time shouldn't be a problem. What else can I say about Nosferatu? So the film takes place even earlier in 1838. We have the characters. Like I said, there are many versions, and they are referred to as different names in different versions. And the one I'm watching is on Amazon Prime. So we have Hutter, who is I guess, real estate agent, and they are contacted from Transylvania, and they are told that the Count wants to buy land in their area of Germany. And so Hutter, oh, the phone. So Hutter leaves his wife Ellen. One second. So Hutter leaves his wife Ellen and trek to Transylvania to meet with the Count, and he does manage to sell Count the house, and he spends some time at the castle. And these early scenes are cool because you kind of see Nosferatu in kind of secrecy, and they don't show him till 21 minutes in, which is cool to kind of get some background before we get to the monster. And so the Count ends up putting his Hutter's wife Ellen in a trance, and the man that Hutter works for ends up going mad, becoming a true follower of Nosferatu. And there's a book of vampires, and Van Helsing also referenced here at a brief moment in the movie. So it's interesting to see all these different characters, and some of them do come into the modern day interpretations of Dracula as well. So Van Helsing, obviously a very notable character in these vampire films. I really like the use of shadows. Nosferatu has these very long, decrepit fingers and his long nose, and they use shadows as he's walking through doorways and stuff, and you can see his like exaggerated features and look. And I think definitely appreciate the attention to filming him that way. It still holds up. He's still really creepy. Definitely a classic vampire look that stands the test of time, as someone watching it almost 100 years later. And you've seen a reference in SpongeBob and stuff, and that's that character, to watch it in the original film. So there's a whole scene where Nosferatu is being transported on a ship, and some bad things happen on the ship as a result of him being on board, and he's causing death and mishap and plague, and of course that caused a mass hysteria in the town. And if I feel like it's things that you feel like you've seen, even though you probably haven't seen this movie, because it's just so familiarized in like our culture and just the way of storytelling. Because this is just a classic example of telling the story. Like I said, with the age, I don't think it becomes a factor in how the story is told. I think it's clear. Um, Everything makes sense. I wasn't confused when watching this movie, and I feel like that's something that puts people off from watching these very old films, is that they, well, first, it being a silent film, you don't have dialogue, so you're just listening to orchestral music, and you're reading these title cards. And for some people, that is not engaging enough to be a film experience at this point. And I kind of get that with what we're used to now watching, and then going to this is definitely, like I said, a stark contrast from what we're used to. But if you're any bit intrigued from this, I would definitely recommend seeing this, just for the classic horror experience. And you can find so many references of this film in any horror movie. This is all where it began. So to kind of see an origin from that genre, and to watch these characters as they were originally portrayed, this is the very first interpretation of a vampire. So yeah, that is my review of Nosferatu, 1922. I feel like this is a good episode to encapsulate the idea of the show, because I picked three incredibly different titles. Obviously one spanning from way decades earlier than this one. 2009's Limitless is the next movie I'm reviewing. So Watchmen, Nosferatu, and Limitless. So it's literally just picking movies that I want to see and that I'm currently watching this week, regardless of genre, regardless of what year it came out, regardless of anything basically. I'm just picking movies that I find interesting and having a little dialogue about each one. And it's every single Friday, and this is Film Cult Podcast, as you are still listening, or as I am just listening to myself for the past 3 episodes. But hey, you gotta start somewhere. So, Limitless is a movie starring Bradley Cooper. Also, Robert De Niro has a part in this film. And I've seen parts of this movie just in passing, but I've never sat down and watched the whole thing. So, Limitless came out in 2011. And what year did Watchmen come out that I was just talking about early in this podcast? Not the TV show. That's what I was, the first thing I was going to mention is that I think Limitless was, well, Watchmen came out in 2009, so this is a few years later. Not that they have any correlation whatsoever, but both of these movies that I reviewed today have TV show spin-offs. Watchmen being pretty recent. I believe Limitless had a brief show run. Yeah, there was. I think there was one season of it. Yeah, so it's the same kind of idea from what I'm reading. The NZT drug and the FBI, and him being in New York City as a writer. So yeah, it's following the same kind of idea. But Limitless was a fun movie. Bradley Cooper is kind of like a washed up writer living in New York City. He's kind of got writer's block. He has a novel that he has been contracted to write, and he's way behind. And his love life is failing. And yes, he's kind kind of at the pits of despair, and he runs into a brother of his ex-wife, and he is a very successful entrepreneur, and he says, "Why don't we go out to lunch?" And Bradley Cooper's like, "Yeah, sure." And they have this little discussion, and his ex-wife's brother says, "Hey, I have this pill," and Bradley Cooper's like, "No, I don't do pills," and he's like, "No, this is different from anything you've ever heard of. This isn't a drug to get you high. This is for the main premise of this miracle pill, NZT, as it is referred to, is they say we only use 20% of our brain, but this drug helps you unlock all of it." And so, of course, Bradley Cooper ends up taking one, and he is enlightened, and he is able to learn languages, and like very quickly, able to study stock markets and gain finances incredibly fast by just looking at strategies, and like he kind of just absorbs everything that he looks at. And it's a cool concept for a movie. And of course, as he starts to rise in finance and stocks, and people start to notice that there's something strange going on, and that's where Robert De Niro's character kind of enters into the mix, because he is also a businessman, and he sees Cooper's character, Eddie Mora, starts giving him financial advice based off of his enhanced views that only Mora knows. Of course, Mora knows that he's taking the drug, but it's unbeknownst to De Niro's character. And so the brother, the ex-wife brother, ends up dying, which is kind of foreshadowing. He got caught up in this NZT dealing, and is offed right before Bradley Cooper gets back to him, and so Cooper ends up finding the drugs, so gets a whole stash of NZT, and is off to make his life so much more better. And so it's kind of one of those stories of a huge rise to fame, and he is a top financier, and is absolutely making headway with all these stock investments and stuff, and everyone thinks that he's some sort of prodigy. Some cool, not experimental, but some interesting filming in this, as far as they change the whole color scheme when he's on the drugs. Everything is like heightened. The color is like intensified, and that's kind of neat. And there's some cool like use of camera angles and stuff right when he takes the drug. There's kind of like this, not psychedelic, but a weird view of how he's visualizing himself, and he kind of has like these out of body experiences initially when taking the drug, and he kind of sees himself. He's kind of looking at himself in that moment, but from like an outside view, almost as if like he was taken out of his body, and he's like watching himself. So that's kind of neat to kind of portray his experience that way. So yeah, nobody's sure of what this NZT drug is, and he gets caught up with a loan shark who also starts taking the drug. He initially gives him a few pills to pay him off, and the card shark get the pill in like a liquid form. And so the whole crux of the plot is that Eddie Mora, Bradley Cooper, is taking too much of the pill at first to, sustain his high financial knowledge and to keep his mind at maximum percentage. And he does so much that he starts to pretty much overdose on this drug, and it starts to fuck up his brain, and he can't remember large chunks of time. And there's even a little subplot here. I know I'm going deep into the plot and stuff, but there's even like a murder that he might have been the culprit of, but he's unsure because he can't remember that portion of time because he's on so much NZT. So having this super drug kind of bites him in the ass for that, and it starts to damage his mind. So it's a pretty cool concept for a movie, and De Niro's good in it. Bradley Cooper sure is good in it. There's some cool visuals. Like I said, when he's taking the drug and how that affects him is cool. How it's cinematically shot. So overall, I would definitely recommend this movie. It's a fun one. Good to just watch if it just came on TV, you know. And I can see why they made a spin-off show, because it's interesting enough for something that could keep a episodic longevity without getting stale. Even though I think it said that it was canceled after one season. So that's this week's cultivation of films that I found, and I hope I find someone who listens to this, so it's not just me making these for my own sake. But hey, if you are listening, comment, rate, upvote, uplike, whatever, fuck, and subscribe to the page if you can, and message me at filmcultpodcast@gmail.com. I'll take your feedback, your suggestions, so on and so forth. I'm up to anything. Reach out, definitely, if you are listening out there. So, I guess I'll see you guys next Friday, and enjoy your weekend.